process for me, and it literally took 10 years, I'd say, for me to get to the point where I feel I'm moving forward now with my life. One of the things I hate to hear is when people say, well, haven't you moved on by now? You know, it's like, no, I'm never going to move on. You know, this is going to be with me forever. But I think there's a big difference between moving on, which to me means forgetting, and moving forward, which means continuing living my life. And that's what I have tried to do. I couldn't go back to New York City for 10 years, not even to visit friends. There was just a fear. But finally last April, it was funny, it was after the therapy session. I was walking out, and I just knew, I thought, it's time. I'm ready to go back. So on Good Friday last year, my parents, my sister, and I took the training in, specifically for me to go down to Ground Zero. And we did, and it was what I thought it would be. It was extremely emotional. I just stood there in the street and sobbed. But it was a good kind of crying, if that makes sense. It was a release, because to me, that whole area of what I will always consider Ground Zero, no matter what is there, that is a sacred place for me. That is the burial ground of so many people. And it meant so much to me to be able to point out to my parents and my sister, this is where I was when that happened, and then this is where I ran over to that spot, you know, so that they could get a sense of just what it had been like that morning. So that was a huge step in helping me move forward. And I found, incredibly, I had always been looking online for other 9/11 survivors. And it wasn't until January of last year that I finally found some groups that had actually been around for quite a while, and I can't explain why it took that long for me to find them. But it meant so much, it still means so much. I've not met any of these people, but through emails or phone calls, to communicate with people that I know what I mean when I say something. You know, that's been one of the difficult things. Being in Lancaster is, there's no one here, at least that I know of, who was there, who knows what I'm feeling, who knows what it was like. And, you know, often when people find out I moved here from New York and they find out I was down there at 9/11, I can just see the look on their face like, oh no, what do I say now? Like, you know, they don't know what to say. So they feel awkward, and then I feel awkward. So pretty soon I just kind of stopped talking about it, you know. And then last year, with the 10th anniversary, of course there was a lot of attention, and I was asked by people, you know, to speak. And I spoke at another high school, and I think it's important to tell, just so that those of you who are just so young or who may not even remember it all, just so you all never forget that day in our history, and that you will always remember. And anyway, I'd like to open it up if anybody has any questions. Feel free to ask me anything. I am an open book. So. No questions? Yes. The book is called That Day in September. I'll put a plug in, you can find it on Amazon. I also have a website, artievanwy.com, which kind of goes more into my story. And I have other things on there, other things I've written about when I returned to Ground Zero for the first time, what it was like to go down to the memorial a few months ago, So,
At some point you have to become angry. Who do you blame?
that even still, that is a really, really hard question. It may sound trite, and maybe it's the simple answer I need to give, but I blame the evil that man is capable of. Because I saw both extremes that day. The men who did that were evil incarnate, I mean. But what I witnessed on the ground that day was the goodness of people. People helping one another, just reaching out. I mean, you know, so it's tragic to think that people are capable of that much evil, but that's what I blame. My anger probably gets directed at things that even have nothing to do with 9/11 sometimes, but you know, that's that answer. Chris?
The day that Osama bin Laden was killed, did you feel a sense of vindication?
Another good question. That was really a strange evening for me because being here in Lancaster, I actually found out about it. My niece sent me a text message. And so I turned the TV on and I felt so incredibly isolated because I was watching, you know, people gathering in New York down at Ground Zero, and I longed to be there with them because I had nowhere to go in Lancaster. You know, there was no spot to go to. There were not going to be people gathering, you know, so it was just me alone in my apartment. And it was a whole lot of emotions. I mean, was I glad he was dead? Yes, but it didn't change anything. People still died, you know. I still saw people die, so yeah, good, he's dead, but that doesn't bring those people back. So it was bittersweet. It was bittersweet. And it's funny, I've been watching an HBO television series called The Newsroom, which is takes place in a fictional cable station. And recently, one of their episodes was about the night bin Laden was killed. And I was watching it with my partner, and I remember I realized I was biting down on my knuckle because the tears were coming down, and I didn't want to break out sobbing, but just seeing it on TV, and you know, it just brought it all back. And that can happen, you know, sometimes when I least expect it. You know, something will just trigger the memories, the thoughts, and you know, it's right there in the front.
How did you feel when you first found out it was like an attack? Or like you found out what was happening?
Well, unbelief. And you know, I'm not quite sure when I was able to put the pieces together. Well, I guess that afternoon, I know I wasn't able to watch TV for weeks or read newspapers. But you know, I just heard, yeah, that we were attacked, and it was, you know, at first it was the fear of, oh my God, we're at war. Well, which we are, but you know, I mean, I thought a full scale, you know, the whole country being invaded kind of war, you know, but I guess sometime later that day, I realized it had been contained. Yeah, I wasn't quite sure what to think at first.
When did you find out about Clinton?
Sometime that afternoon. I mean, I remember when I was walking up to my apartment, like I said, I remember hearing people say something about a plane in Pennsylvania, and I didn't know what they were talking about. So, you know, sometime later that day, I don't know who it was that had told me that. Yeah.
Not necessarily regrets or looking at the guys being attacked, but knowing what you know now, would you have done something different in the same situations, like help when people looking for it or
Oh, sure. I mean, realistically, I don't know if there was any more I could have done. To have done much more probably would have put my life more at risk than it had been already, and so maybe I wouldn't even be here. So I don't know, but sure, yeah, I wish I could have helped as many people as I could, but you know, it was what it was.
You said you loved this. Can you describe how you felt afterward, knowing that the place you loved was
Devastated, totally devastated. And to look at it, and I'm sure you've seen or will see the pictures of what it looked like in the aftermath, but one of the most meaningful moments to me, it must have been a few weeks after 9/11, and I think we were going to start going back to my office building the next week. So I got up early one Saturday morning, and I bought a bouquet of flowers at a corner market, and got on the subway and went down there, and I got up, and it was early, hardly anyone was there, and at that point the streets were blocked for a block, so I could only look down at the rubble and the smoke, and I stood there, and again I just started crying. I put my head down and was sobbing, and I felt an arm go around my shoulder. And I looked up, and it was a policeman. He squeezed me and he said, "Let it out." So I put my head on his shoulder and I just cried. And then his partner came over and I told them what my experience had been that day. And then I asked them, could I please go down to ground zero, which no one was allowed to. But they let me go past the barricades. So I was standing right at the edge of all that rubble, that smoke, and truly I felt like I was standing at sacred ground. And I had the flowers. I knelt down, I put the flowers there. I knew they wouldn't last. I had my moment. I prayed, I guess, or said something to God, but I'm just so glad I had that moment, that those kind, generous policemen let me have that moment there. So, because yeah, it was like, yeah, it was just a place I loved being at. So there was a great loss just having that gone and just seeing the skeletal remains of it.
About 3 minutes remaining.
Okay, 3 minutes. One last question. Yes.
When you look back to the memorial of 9/11, did you see anybody else the same that you knew?
Well, I knew of 3 people. One of the lawyers in our law firm was a volunteer fireman, so he actually ran in the buildings to help and he was killed. But there were 2 young guys, Joe and Judd, who lived in my apartment building. And though I didn't really know them well, except in passing, their deaths really affected me because they were the 2 faces I could really put to this tragedy. And I looked for their names specifically when I was down there and actually took a picture of each of their names. Anything else? Yes?
You know, sometimes when you look back, you wish you were switch places with some of the people that passed away.
I'm sorry, do I what?
When you think about it, you wish that you were switch places with some of the people that passed away.
Do I wish that? Not so much now, but yeah, there were times where I actually wished it had been me. Yeah. So I guess that's it.